She walked out on the Billionaire, but when life gave her one last test, he was the only man left. Gabriella Chen stared at the MRI, the sunlight cutting through Mount Sinai's windows. The mass pressed against her auditory nerve. She gripped the edges of the scan, her mind racing. Every carefully built layer of control now seemed fragile. Her phone vibrated. Christopher Ashford. The name sent a jolt through her. An echo from the night she left the Fifth Avenue penthouse, leaving her engagement ring on the marble console. She had walked away to protect herself, to keep her independence intact. Now, he was calling at the moment her independence would be tested in ways she hadn't imagined. Could she face the unknown alone? Or was there a part of her that still needed him? Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we're releasing another story full of choices, courage, and lessons you won't want to miss. Let's begin. Gabriella Chen grew up in a cramped Brooklyn apartment just a few blocks from Prospect Park. The space was small, walls lined with her mother's sewing projects, fabric scraps, and the faint scent of thread and starch that never quite left the air. Her father's trumpet case rested in the corner, a quiet reminder of the music that had once filled their modest home. Life was simple, demanding, and tight, but for Gabriella, it was fertile ground for ambition. Her mother worked long nights at a neighborhood sewing shop, her fingers dancing across the machine with practiced rhythm. Gabriella often sat nearby under the warm glow of a single desk lamp, textbooks stacked precariously around her, fingers cramped from taking notes for hours on end. Every seam her mother stitched, every client she satisfied, became part of Gabriella's understanding of dedication. The small apartment, the steady hum of the sewing machine, and the occasional strain of a jazz melody from her father's horn taught her that mastery required focus, patience, and relentless effort. School offered an escape but also a challenge. At Columbia University, she was frequently the only black woman in her honors classes, a reality that forced her to develop both resilience and precision. Professors and peers alike would test her, questioning her arguments, challenging her calculations, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. Gabriella learned to meet every doubt with preparation and poise. She read every balance sheet, market analysis, and historical trend with the same rigor that her father applied to music scores. To her, numbers had rhythm, patterns carried nuance, and the market, like a composition, responded to the observer's understanding. After graduation, Gabriella moved quickly into the financial sector, but she was never content with incremental success. Her first office was modest, a small suite on Broad Street with enough room for her desk, a few chairs for clients, and shelves lined with economic journals. She had no luxury of a view over the skyline, no spacious conference rooms, but the location placed her steps from the New York Stock Exchange and the pulse of the city's financial heartbeat. There, she founded Chen Capital Advisory, a boutique investment firm designed to advise mid-sized companies on acquisitions, mergers, and financial strategy. The firm's early days were grueling. She worked long hours, often alone, navigating complex negotiations while balancing client expectations and regulatory compliance. Her reputation grew quickly. She had a gift for identifying patterns in markets that others overlooked, translating volatile trends into actionable insights. Like her father interpreting jazz, she could sense the shifts, the subtle notes that indicated opportunity or risk. Bloomberg noticed her work before she even turned 30, highlighting her strategies and accomplishments. In the financial district, a woman who was both black and Asian and had built her firm from scratch was still rare, and Gabriella understood that recognition was only half the battle. Respect had to be earned continuously. Every meeting became a test. She entered rooms where her expertise was assumed secondary until proven otherwise, where potential clients hesitated to trust her guidance until numbers validated her recommendations. Gabriella's responses were precise, measured, and unflinching. Each successful negotiation, each smart acquisition, added to a quiet but undeniable presence in a world that often underestimated her. Over time, She became known not only for insight, but also for an integrity that refused compromise. Her clients learned that she did not make decisions lightly and did not bend under pressure. Dignity was her constant benchmark, her non-negotiable standard. Gabriella's personal life mirrored her professional discipline. Relationships were fleeting. Partnerships required alignment of vision and intellect, not just convenience or social expectation. She built boundaries around her time and her energy, understanding that ambition required focus and clarity. For her, independence was not an aspiration but a principle. She did not seek validation from wealth, titles, or prestige. She measured success in competence, self-respect, and the ability to shape her own destiny. By the time her firm gained prominence, Gabriella had created more than a company. She had built a space where her ideas mattered, where merit prevailed over legacy, and where insight was valued above privilege. Her office, though still modest compared to the high-rise towers around her, became a hub for innovation. Young entrepreneurs, women in finance, and minority-led ventures sought her counsel, recognizing in her a model of possibility and perseverance. Her reputation carried weight not through loud declarations, but through consistent results. Gabriella's skill in reading the markets, structuring deals, and advising clients earned her respect in boardrooms that were often skeptical at first glance. She became known as someone who could not be intimidated, someone whose intellect was matched only by an unwavering sense of principle. She had entered a world dominated by power and lineage, yet she carved her own path, refusing to rely on connections that she had not earned. In all of this, Gabriella held tightly to the lesson instilled by her upbringing. Dignity is not negotiable. Every calculation, every meeting, every strategic choice reflected that core belief. The crowded Brooklyn apartment, her mother's sewing machine, her father's disciplined musicianship, these were the foundation. From the cramped quarters near Prospect Park to the offices along Broad Street, Gabriella Chun had built her life with precision, patience, and unyielding pride. She answered to no one but herself, and in doing so, she had proven that independence was not just survival, it was mastery. Gabriella Chun adjusted her notes as the lights brightened over the conference hall at the Javits Center. She stood behind the podium, her charcoal blazer sharp, black pencil skirt neat, and curls pinned back. Investors, developers, and city planners filled the room, their attention a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Gabriella spoke clearly, explaining her model for sustainable financing in urban renewal projects, emphasizing how private capital could drive projects without displacing existing communities. Her voice carried authority. Her analysis was precise, data-driven, and impossible to ignore. Among the audience, Christopher Ashford III leaned forward in the third row. At 28, he managed a substantial portion of the Ashford Group, the family empire that had defined Manhattan's skyline for generations. The group's buildings stretched from Battery Park City to Dumbo, their shadow crossing Central Park and shaping the city's character. Christopher's tailored Tom Ford suit fit like armor, signaling wealth and influence, yet his attention was unusually sharp. Unlike many in the room, he wasn't merely cataloging names or waiting for networking opportunities. He was listening. When Gabriella finished her overview, Christopher raised a hand. "Your model assumes community buy-in," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "What happens if the community's definition of value doesn't align with market realities?" The room quieted. Gabriella looked at him directly, noting a confidence that came not from privilege, but from command of a complex world. "Then we're asking the wrong question," she replied. "Maybe the focus should be on why our markets fail to recognize what communities actually need. Profit alone isn't progress." A murmur ran through the audience, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Christopher smiled. That moment, brief as it was, marked the start of a connection neither expected. After the session, Christopher approached. "Coffee?" he asked. No pretense, no assumptions, just genuine interest. They ended up at Balthazar, the Soho Cafe, buzzing with late afternoon activity. Conversation that began with urban development spilled into personal histories, ambitions, and unexpected humor. What started as a professional exchange slowly revealed shared values and curiosity about the world beyond the boardroom. Christopher surprised Gabriella in ways that mattered. He visited Brooklyn, seeking out her mother's apartment, asking about her mother's sewing, listening to her father's old jazz recordings. He asked questions that required thought, demonstrating a respect that was rare in his circles. Over 18 months, they navigated a relationship that was both professional and personal. Gabriella's drive was never diminished or questioned, and Christopher's privilege never became a barrier. They built a partnership in which ambition was celebrated rather than feared, and influence was shared rather than assumed. Eventually, they moved in together, choosing a Tribeca loft with industrial windows that let in morning light. The apartment was neutral ground, far from his family's Upper East Side holdings, far from her childhood neighborhood, a space where two worlds could coexist. Mornings began with shared coffee, the Wall Street Journal spread across the table, debates about policy, development, and the ethics of investment flowing naturally between them. Gabriella found herself considering perspectives beyond her own, allowing, for the first time, the presence of someone else's vision alongside her own. The loft became a laboratory for compromise and learning. Christopher brought insight into development projects. Gabriella offered sharp analysis on financing and community impact. Their discussions were sometimes heated, always intellectually rigorous, and rarely ended with one dominating the other. It was a dynamic that Gabriella had not anticipated, a relationship built on challenge and respect rather than control and approval. Even as she grew close to him, Gabriella maintained her boundaries. Independence was non-negotiable, a principle instilled from her earliest days in Brooklyn. Yet the trust and understanding Christopher demonstrated created a rare space where vulnerability didn't feel like weakness. Sharing the loft, their mornings, their conversations allowed her to envision a life where ambition and partnership could coexist. She realized that two strong, determined individuals could occupy the same space without diminishing one another. Their evenings often included walks along the High Line, the old railway turned elevated park offering views of the city that neither of them had seen from that perspective. Conversations about affordable housing, investment models, and urban renewal became punctuated by observations about architecture, public space, and community culture. Through these walks, Gabriella saw that Christopher's interest in her world was more than curiosity. It was active engagement, a willingness to understand and value experiences outside of his upbringing. By the end of that 18-month period, their relationship had grown into a partnership that was rare for both. Gabriella's ambition was affirmed rather than threatened, and Christopher had learned to listen and adapt in ways that his wealth and upbringing had never required. The Tribeca loft became more than a residence. It became a symbol of balance, where two individuals could pursue separate dreams while supporting one another's goals. Gabriella allowed herself to imagine a future that included someone else's ambitions, without surrendering her own, an experience that was as unfamiliar as it was transformative. It was in these months, between boardroom strategies and shared cups of coffee, that Gabriella began to sense that partnership was possible without compromise of principle. Two worlds, one shaped by relentless ambition and careful cultivation of independence, the other by privilege, legacy, and resources, could meet, exchange ideas, and coexist. The experience was grounding, challenging, and exhilarating, laying the groundwork for the events that would later test every value she had built her life upon. The Ashford family penthouse overlooked Central Park, the November air outside crisp and clear. 17 stories above the city, the skyline glittered, buildings stretching in neat lines across the horizon. Inside, the apartment gleamed with polished surfaces and understated opulence. Candles flickered on the dining table, casting warmth over the room where the engagement announcement dinner had brought family and a few close associates together. Gabriella Chen felt the weight of every detail, from the fine china to the subtle hum of classical music. Patricia Ashford presided over the evening with the kind of confidence that comes from generations of knowing exactly how the world operated. Her compliments were carefully measured, her questions polite, meant to assess without offending. She asked Gabriella about her firm, her clients, the projects she had managed. Gabriella answered with precision, aware that each word carried significance. Christopher's uncle, Raymond Ashford, lifted his wine glass with a practiced air. His silver hair and impeccable tailoring spoke of decades entrenched in Manhattan's elite circles. "Of course," he began, voice smooth. "Once you're married, you'll want to consider folding your firm into the Ashford Investment Division. Christopher has spoken highly of your skills, and it would be a shame for such talent to operate outside our resources." Gabriella's fork paused midair. The suggestion hit harder than she expected. Folding Chun Capital into his family's empire would mean surrendering the independence she had spent years cultivating. Raymond continued, adding, "And naturally, with children in the future, you'll want more flexibility. These arrangements make life simpler, more manageable." Decisions about her life had been presented as conclusions, made without her input. She looked at Christopher, searching for any sign of disagreement, any defense of the firm she had built from scratch. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on his plate. Calculation replaced comfort, and in that silence, Gabriella understood the truth. They were not considering her as a partner or an equal. To them, she was an asset to be absorbed, a talented addition to a legacy they already controlled. Her mind raced through the compromises she had made throughout her life. Columbia University, where she had been one of the few black women in honors classes. Client meetings where every recommendation had been questioned before trust was granted. The countless times friends of Christopher had asked where she really came from, as though her identity had to be measured against expectations she had never agreed to. Each compromise had taught her resilience, patience, and strategy. None, however, had prepared her for being assessed as property rather than as a person. Finally, Christopher spoke. "We could discuss it," he said, his tone careful. "Figure out a structure that works for everyone." His words were tentative, lacking conviction. They were a compromise offered before she had asked, a solution designed to satisfy others rather than affirm her accomplishments. Gabriella's mind cleared in that instant. She realized she could not accept this. She would not allow her life's work to be reduced to an addition to someone else's empire. Independence was not negotiable. Every hour she had spent building Chun Capital Advisory, every decision made in pursuit of her vision, demanded recognition. She would not bend to a structure designed to minimize her influence, her authority, or her voice. She set her fork down, her posture straightening. The room continued its polite conversation, unaware of the quiet storm rising beside the table. Gabriella's decision crystallized with clarity. She would leave. Not angrily, not with drama, but firmly. Her life, her work, and her principles would not be diluted to fit someone else's idea of convenience or legacy. In that moment, Gabriella understood a fundamental truth. The recognition of her own worth was more important than approval from any family, institution, or partner. She had survived every challenge, earned every accomplishment, and built a reputation based on skill, integrity, and unwavering dedication. She would not compromise those values, even for love. Christopher remained silent. His hesitation, his inability to defend her independence, confirmed her resolve. The man she cared for, the one she had shared ambition and mornings with, had not risen to protect the principle she had fought to uphold her entire life. Gabriella knew then that she had to act for herself. As the dinner concluded and polite smiles and handshakes were exchanged, Gabriella excused herself quietly. She walked toward the elevator with purpose, her steps echoing softly against the polished floors. The marble, the chandeliers, the city view, all impressive and commanding, meant nothing compared to the ownership of her own destiny. By the time she reached the street below, the crisp November air filled her lungs. She paused, considering the ring still on her finger, the life she had almost surrendered for the sake of expectation. Then she slipped it off, placing it on the marble console she would not return to. It was a symbolic release, a clear declaration that her career, her autonomy, and her principles were hers alone. The walk out of the Ashford penthouse marked more than the end of an engagement. It was a turning point in Gabriella's life. She was leaving behind not just a man, but a system that assumed she would submit her accomplishments to someone else's hierarchy. Every lesson she had learned about resilience, ambition, and dignity now guided her steps. The path forward would be hers entirely, shaped by effort, skill, and unwavering self-respect. That night, Gabriella understood a lesson that would guide the next chapter of her life. Walking away was not failure. It was clarity. It was proof that independence and principle could never be traded, even for the promise of love, status, or comfort. The November air was sharp against Gabriella's cheeks as she stepped onto Fifth Avenue, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Yellow cabs slid past, their motion a constant rhythm in a city that never paused. Christopher stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, voice low and cautious. "They don't mean it the way it sounded," he said, trying to soften the blow of the evening's conversation. Gabriella turned to him, letting the street noise fill the silence between words. "Unreasonable," he added, attempting to dismiss her feelings. That single word, light in tone but heavy in implication, struck her like the culmination of every compromise she had ever made. Columbia, the classrooms where she was often the only black woman, every meeting where she had to assert expertise before being trusted, the subtle questions from peers about where she truly came from, all of it surged through her mind. Her voice was steady, clear, and unyielding. "I've been compromising my entire life," she said. "With clients, with colleagues, with friends who assumed I needed permission to succeed. I've bent for too long. I'm done compromising, especially with someone who's supposed to love me." She slid into the back seat of the car, the leather cool beneath her palms. Christopher didn't move to stop her. The absence of resistance confirmed the clarity she had felt since stepping out of the penthouse. This was the right decision. Not made in anger, not from spite, but from the recognition that some doors must close for growth to begin. The following 3 years transformed Gabriella in ways that no boardroom could have predicted. Chun Capital Advisory expanded into venture capital, dedicating resources to businesses led by women and minority founders. Every deal reinforced her reputation as a strategic mind who understood markets and people, capable of creating opportunities where others saw risk. Her office moved to the Flatiron Building, a corner space with large windows through which she could watch the city pulse beneath her. It became a symbol of survival, of proof that determination, skill, and principle could carve a place even in a world built for privilege. Occasionally, Gabriella dated. There was an investor from Chicago who respected her intellect but lacked the pace she demanded, and a Columbia professor whose admiration for her mind could not match the fire she carried in her career. Neither relationship endured, and Gabriella convinced herself that preference for solitude was deliberate. Yet late nights in the Tribeca loft she had purchased outright, the same loft she had once shared, were moments of quiet reflection. Success was undeniable, but she sometimes questioned whether it was enough to fill the spaces left by connection and companionship. Her mother noticed the patterns, noting during a weekly dinner, "You're building walls instead of bridges." Gabriella acknowledged the comment with a nod but remained silent, unwilling to examine how carefully she had insulated herself from potential hurt. Then the headaches began. A subtle pressure behind her left eye at first, easily attributed to the hours spent analyzing data and reviewing portfolios. Soon blurred vision followed, brief and dismissible, yet increasingly impossible to ignore. Concern growing, Gabriella scheduled an appointment at Mount Sinai Hospital. The MRI results brought the room into sharp focus, a mass pressing against her auditory nerve. The neurosurgeon's explanation was precise but sobering. An acoustic neuroma, benign yet growing, required surgical intervention. The procedure was treatable, he assured her, but it carried significant risks: partial hearing loss, facial paralysis, complications that could alter daily life and independence. Gabriella scheduled the surgery for early December. She informed only her business partner, leaving friends, acquaintances, and even her mother unaware of the details. The decision to face the procedure alone was consistent with a lifetime of self-reliance. Independence had been the cornerstone of her existence, and vulnerability was a challenge she had historically approached with caution. Preparations began, reviewing post-surgery logistics, arranging a controlled environment for recovery, and mentally rehearsing every stage of the process. Gabriella's meticulous nature meant that she left nothing to chance. She would confront this medical challenge as she had approached every obstacle in life, through preparation, determination, and unwavering discipline. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet uncertainty lingered, reminding her that some challenges could not be solved solely with intellect and effort. As she reviewed her schedule, finalized travel to Mount Sinai, and packed her essentials for the hospital stay, Gabriella recognized that this test was different. It demanded more than strategy or endurance. It required trust, and, in ways she was unaccustomed to, reliance. Her independence had been an achievement, a shield, and a principle. Now, it was a challenge, confronting her with the limits of control in a situation where outcomes were uncertain. And yet, even in that tension, Gabriella felt a sense of resolve. She had walked away from a life that compromised her values, faced adversity alone, and transformed her firm into a force of influence. Whatever lay ahead in the operating room, she would meet it with the same discipline, courage, and clarity that had guided her every decision. 2 weeks before her scheduled surgery, Gabriella's office phone rang with a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end immediately carried a weight she had not expected. "Gabby," Christopher said, the old nickname breaking through her carefully maintained barriers. She froze, the sound of his voice taking her back to a time when life felt both simpler and far more complicated. He spoke with the same clarity and directness she had noticed during their first encounter at the Javits Center. "Brain surgery is never routine, Gabby. I know you're trying to handle everything on your own, but this isn't something you should face alone." Her instinct was to decline, to put the phone down, to maintain the independence that had guided every major decision of her adult life. She had survived on her own for years, built a firm from the ground up, and kept herself insulated from distractions. Allowing him back into this moment felt like conceding a vulnerability she had carefully avoided. And yet, beneath that reflex, a part of her admitted the fear that had been growing silently. The uncertainty, the risks, the possibility of waking from surgery changed. She agreed to meet him, coffee, the neutral ground of Balthazar, where so many conversations had begun. Christopher was already there when she arrived. Time had left its mark on him. His face carried subtle lines, and there was a quiet depth in his eyes that had not been there before. He seemed weathered, seasoned by experiences that had reshaped his understanding of power, responsibility, and consequence. The man she had once known as a rising heir was now someone who had confronted limits she could see reflected in his measured movements. He spoke first, his words deliberate. "I owe you an apology, Gabby. 3 years ago, I was a coward. I chose what was easy instead of what was right. I should have stood up for you. I should have made it clear to my family that your work, your firm, your independence, none of that was negotiable." Gabriella felt the echo of old hurt, but listened, letting him continue. "I left the Ashford Group," he said, his voice steady. "I started my own development company. It's focused on affordable housing and sustainable urban renewal. Everything you tried to teach me about building for communities, about valuing people over profit, I've been putting into practice." His words were not meant to impress. They were confessions, a reckoning with the man he had been and the man he was attempting to become. Gabriella studied him carefully, noticing the sincerity in his tone, the careful articulation that suggested he had thought through every misstep of their past. "I'm not here to manage your recovery," he continued. "I'm not here to take over. I just want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. Not because you're weak, but because sometimes the strongest choice is letting someone stand with you." She felt the familiar tension, pride, fear, and a residual sense of self-protection, all vying for dominance. For years, she had equated independence with survival, strength with the refusal to rely on anyone. Accepting help now felt like undermining everything she had worked for. Then she remembered her father, the jazz musician, who used to say that the bravest musicians were not the ones who played flawless solos, but those who left space for others, who allowed harmony to emerge from listening as much as playing. Gabriella reflected on that lesson, realizing that strength could exist alongside support, that relying on someone who understood what she had built did not diminish her. It acknowledged the complexity of her life. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I don't need you to take care of me," she said carefully, measuring each word. "But I wouldn't mind having someone there who understands what this costs, who understands the stakes, the sacrifices, and the work it takes just to stay standing." Christopher nodded, a subtle relief passing through his expression. There was no immediate closeness, no sudden restoration of old intimacy, only recognition that both had changed. The dynamics of their past were gone, replaced by the reality that some battles required collaboration and some moments demanded trust. They sat together in silence for a few minutes, watching the activity on the street below, each absorbing the magnitude of the conversation. Gabriella considered the implications. Allowing him in did not mean surrender. It did not erase her accomplishments, nor did it place her independence at risk. Instead, it offered a measure of shared strength in a situation where complete control was impossible. Christopher's presence was steady, unobtrusive, and attuned. He listened as she spoke about the preparations she had made for surgery, the logistics she had arranged, the doubts she had quietly managed. He asked practical questions, not to direct, but to anticipate challenges she might face, showing concern without encroaching. By the time their coffee ended, Gabriella felt a cautious shift within herself. The armor she had built around independence had not shattered, but it had been tested. She realized that strength could include accepting help when the circumstances demanded it, and that allowing someone to stand beside her did not compromise the principles she had defended her entire life. The meeting closed with no grand promises, no declarations of rekindled romance. It was a quiet acknowledgement of presence, respect, and understanding. Christopher's offer was simple: a companion through a difficult period, a witness to the challenges she would face, and someone who could share the responsibility of navigating the unknown. As Gabriella left Balthazar, she understood that the coming weeks would be a trial unlike any she had encountered professionally or personally. Yet for the first time in years, she recognized that she did not have to face it entirely alone. Strength, she realized, could coexist with support, and the courage to let someone in was itself a measure of power. Snow fell lightly over Central Park that December morning, dusting the bare branches with white and quieting the city just enough to make the chaos feel distant. Inside Mount Sinai, Gabriella sat on the edge of the pre-op table, her legs swinging slightly, hands clasped over the hospital gown draped around her. Nurses moved efficiently, checking vitals, confirming procedures, placing the four with practiced care. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the low hum of monitors filled the room, grounding her in reality. Christopher was already in the waiting room. He had arrived early, finding a chair near the center, his coat draped neatly over the back. The phone on the table beside him buzzed repeatedly. Messages from friends, associates, even some distant Ashford contacts, but he ignored them all. His attention never wavered from the doors beyond which Gabriella was being prepared. 7 hours stretched like an eternity, measured in deep breaths, the occasional shift in his position, the distant chatter of nurses and visitors. The surgery lasted several hours, precise and deliberate. When the attending surgeon emerged, the brief nod and the words "successful" offered relief, but Gabriella knew the battle was only partially over. Recovery would reveal the cost, the price her body would demand, the subtle changes that could never fully be predicted. The first week was the hardest. Left side hearing diminished, her balance unsteady, energy draining faster than anticipated. Christopher arrived every day, not to direct, not to manage, but to be present. He brought her mother from Brooklyn, ensuring the familiarity of home softened some of the hospital's coldness. He coordinated with her business partner on urgent matters, allowing Gabriella to focus on healing without feeling disconnected from her firm's operations. 2 days after surgery, Gabriella attempted to return to work from her hospital bed. She reached for her laptop, fingers brushing the keyboard, ready to dive back into the world she had built. Christopher's hand intercepted hers. "Not today," he said firmly. "You're not negotiating with recovery. You're following it." Their argument was short, the tension between her insistence on independence and his insistence on support clear. He wasn't challenging her authority. He was challenging her belief that strength required solitary effort. "Real strength also comes from knowing you don't have to stand alone," he reminded her, voice calm but insistent. Gabriella stared at him, frustration mixing with the reluctant understanding that his presence didn't diminish her competence. Slowly, she began to learn what it meant to lean, not because she couldn't stand, but because standing together offered a different kind of power. Each day introduced subtle adjustments. She moved carefully to compensate for her shifting balance, tested her hearing against the steady rhythm of voices in the room, and adapted to the scar above her ear that traced a line through her hair. Christopher never shied away from these challenges. He stayed quietly present, listening when she needed to vent, remaining silent when she wanted solitude. The weeks became lessons in patience and vulnerability. Gabriella confronted the discomfort of letting someone witness her at less than her best, grappling with the feeling that she had always equated weakness with exposure. She realized that needing support in a crisis was not surrender. It was clarity, strategy, and courage. She could still make decisions, run her firm, and maintain her identity while allowing others to share the load of care. Christopher's presence became a mirror of resilience. He did not attempt to fix her, to manage her recovery like a project, or to rewrite the rules of their dynamic. Instead, he created space for her autonomy while offering a steady anchor when she faltered. By the time she was discharged, Gabriella understood that strength was no longer measured solely by independence. It could also be measured by the discernment to let someone share the responsibility without losing herself. The hospital corridor, where she first walked out of surgery, became a place of reflection. She noted the difference in her movements, the subtle reminders of the surgery etched into her body, and the new appreciation for shared resilience. Recovery was ongoing, and the world outside awaited her return, but she carried a quiet certainty that choosing to allow support was an extension of her power, not a contradiction of it. By the end of the first month, Gabriella had embraced the routine of leaning when needed, accepting the combination of medical care, emotional presence, and logistical assistance that Christopher provided. Each day, each minor adjustment reinforced that vulnerability could coexist with authority, that reliance could coexist with achievement, and that shared presence could coexist with personal excellence. Her scar, her diminished hearing, her shaky balance, they were marks of survival, of confrontation with the unexpected, and of growth. Christopher remained there, consistent but unobtrusive, illustrating that partnership was not about control or dependency, but about shared endurance. Gabriella learned to accept his presence not as a challenge to her independence, but as validation that strength sometimes requires collaboration. By the time her energy returned enough to re-engage fully with work, she carried not just the memory of her firm's ongoing projects, but the recognition of an important truth. True resilience encompassed both standing alone and standing with someone who understood the cost of her battles. The weeks in the hospital became a foundation, a quiet proving ground for lessons in humility, strategy, and trust. Lessons she would carry forward long after the scars faded. 6 months after the surgery, Gabriella stood in her Flatiron office, sunlight spilling through the corner windows onto the polished hardwood floor. The phone was pressed to her right ear, the side that had retained full hearing, and she was negotiating with a consortium of investors on funding 50 minority-owned startups. Each word, each pause, each decision reflected the discipline she had cultivated over years of building her firm. Her scarred left side, hidden beneath short, carefully styled hair, reminded her of the path she had walked alone and the moments she had chosen to let others stand beside her. Across town, Christopher oversaw a groundbreaking ceremony in the South Bronx. His development company focused on affordable housing that respected the neighborhoods it served. He moved among community leaders, contractors, and local officials, ensuring that each project aligned with the vision he had cultivated after leaving the Ashford Group. Their ambitions remained separate, distinct, and fiercely personal, yet the support they offered each other created a quiet, unshakable alignment. They had remarried quietly at City Hall, attended only by her mother and his younger sister. There were no family expectations, no carefully choreographed displays of wealth or influence. The ceremony was stripped to its essence. Two people choosing each other after fire had tested them, after pride had clashed with vulnerability, after independence had met the reality of human connection. Their relationship looked different now. The scars of the past, emotional, physical, and professional, had reshaped the way they moved through the world together. It was no longer about completion, no longer about filling gaps or fulfilling a narrative. Instead, it was collaboration in its purest form, respecting boundaries, challenging assumptions, and celebrating achievements without overshadowing one another. Gabriella's balance was not perfect, and her adjusted hearing still required careful attention in crowded rooms, but she moved with confidence. The scar above her left ear no longer felt like a mark of vulnerability. It was a symbol of survival and a reminder that strength could include acceptance. She had learned that allowing someone to stand with her during hardship was not surrender. It was a demonstration of judgment, courage, and discernment. She thought back to the evening on Fifth Avenue, the cold air cutting through her coat as she left a life and love that demanded compromise. Walking away had been excruciating, but it had been necessary. It had shown her what mattered, what could transform, and what she could never accept. The test of surgery, of illness, of forced reliance on another person, had not been about whether she needed Christopher. It had been about recognizing the forms courage could take, the distinction between weakness and trust, and the power inherent in shared experience. Christopher had arrived in her life at a pivotal moment. Their first connection at the Javits Center had been a collision of intellects, ambition, and perspectives. Their break had been a lesson in self-respect and boundaries. This reunion, prompted by crisis, had been a lesson in wisdom, patience, and the nuanced understanding of partnership. Gabriella now held both lessons firmly in her hands. Her mornings began with a deliberate routine. She walked past the city's flow, watched the streets below her office, and considered the young entrepreneurs whose companies she was helping fund. Each conversation was informed not just by her skill in finance, but by the resilience she had cultivated through adversity. Christopher's presence, his parallel work and development, allowed her to measure success in both personal and professional dimensions. They celebrated achievements independently, yet shared in the satisfaction of meaningful impact. Accepting help had transformed her. She no longer saw independence and collaboration as mutually exclusive. She could maintain her authority, run her firm, and manage her life while letting someone stand alongside her when the stakes were highest. Vulnerability, she understood now, was not a void in strength, but a channel for growth. It was wisdom in practice. The recognition that shared effort often produces results impossible to achieve alone. The scar above her ear became a reminder of the day she confronted fear and mortality without compromise. The adjustment in her hearing reminded her that life often required recalibration, attention, and patience. And Christopher's consistent presence reminded her that support could exist without control, that loyalty could be active without diminishing autonomy. Together, they had discovered the balance between self-reliance and trust, between ambition and connection. As she ended the call and leaned back in her chair, Gabriella considered the journey. Every challenge, the departure from Christopher, the fight to sustain her firm, the sudden diagnosis, and the grueling recovery, had contributed to her understanding of strength. Walking away had been a choice rooted in clarity, insisting that her dignity and vision remain intact. Accepting support during crisis had been a choice rooted in wisdom, understanding that strength could be amplified when shared. 6 months on, She could see clearly that the test had been successful. Not because Christopher had stayed, not because the surgery had gone smoothly, but because she had emerged with the knowledge that courage takes many forms. Sometimes it means standing alone, insisting on respect and autonomy. Sometimes it means standing together, allowing another person to witness, support, and participate in the battle without diminishing your power. Her gaze shifted to the office window, the city moving relentlessly below. The projects she supported, the businesses she guided, the community initiatives Christopher led. All of it was evidence that impact and ambition need not be solitary pursuits. She had built an empire on intellect, determination, and independence, but the wisdom she had gained through struggle allowed her to recognize that accepting care and collaboration could strengthen, not weaken, that empire. Gabriella had changed. Her hair was shorter, her movements deliberate, her hearing adjusted. Her office reflected success, but her perspective reflected growth. She carried a quiet certainty. Independence is essential, but wisdom is knowing when to let someone stand beside you. Courage is measured not just in what you can achieve alone, but in understanding that shared effort can transform both people and outcomes. And in that certainty, Gabriella found balance, power, and the kind of fulfillment that cannot be measured by financial success alone. She understood the lesson fully. The value of knowing your worth, the importance of insisting on dignity, and the clarity that sometimes the bravest act is allowing someone you once walked away from to stand with you. Gabriella Chen's journey is a study in contrasts. From a cramped Brooklyn apartment near Prospect Park to a commanding corner office in the Flatiron Building, she built everything with her own determination. Her mother's sewing machine hummed through long nights, her father's jazz records teaching patience and rhythm. Those early lessons of focus and persistence became the foundation for Chen Capital Advisory, a firm she built without leaning on connections or privilege. She demanded respect at every step and refused handouts, understanding that the weight of independence also carried pride and responsibility. Walking away from the Fifth Avenue penthouse was a defining moment. It was not just a rejection of Christopher Ashford's proposal, but a refusal to compromise the empire she had built with intellect and sweat. At the dinner, she realized that her ambition could not coexist with someone else's attempt to absorb it. Self-respect was non-negotiable. Gabriella chose dignity over comfort, independence over submission, a decision that cemented her reputation as formidable and uncompromising. That walk had consequences: loneliness, doubt, and the relentless pressure of carrying her empire alone, but it was the choice she needed to make. Yet life tested her again in the form of a medical crisis she could not control. An acoustic neuroma, benign but threatening, forced her to confront vulnerability. Surgery, recovery, and the limitations it imposed could not be faced through independence alone. Accepting help from Christopher did not diminish her authority or her accomplishments. Instead, it revealed the evolution of strength, the ability to let someone stand beside you while maintaining your own power. The difference between needing someone and choosing to let someone in became clear. Independence is self-reliance. Wisdom is knowing when shared effort enhances survival and growth. Christopher's return during this crisis was a mirror to Gabriella's journey. He had to lose her to understand what real support meant. The Ashford heir, who once represented privilege and expectation, became a man who could contribute meaningfully without overshadowing her. He launched his own company focused on sustainable development and affordable housing, applying lessons Gabriella had tried to teach him. Through this, he demonstrated that understanding and presence can be as transformative as success itself. Gabriella witnessed the evolution of partnership, where contribution does not compromise identity and support is offered without judgment or control. Cultural pressures also shaped Gabriella's experience. Black women are often expected to be strong, independent, and capable of navigating the world alone. That strength is a virtue, but it can also become a prison if it discourages reliance on others when circumstances demand collaboration. Gabriella's medical crisis exposed this tension. She learned that embracing assistance does not weaken authority, it strengthens it. It allows for recovery, preserves her dignity, and reinforces her capacity to continue building. The scar above her ear became a reminder that survival sometimes requires letting another person share the burden. This story illustrates the balance between maintaining an empire and allowing connection. Real partnership does not require folding one life or business into another. Gabriella and Christopher's relationship demonstrates that two whole people can choose each other without surrendering individuality. Mutual respect, aligned values, and shared experiences form the foundation of a partnership that enhances rather than diminishes personal accomplishment. The lesson extends beyond romance. In life and work, collaboration, support, and trust amplify impact. The medical crisis functioned as the ultimate test. Gabriella had to confront fear, dependency, and vulnerability while preserving autonomy. She emerged with clarity. Independence remains essential, but the wisdom to let someone stand with you when circumstances demand it is transformative. Her empire endured, her success continued, her reputation remained intact. Accepting help became a mark of insight, not concession. She proved that strength can coexist with reliance, that courage is multidimensional, and that vulnerability can coexist with power. Gabriella's journey also shows how choices shape identity. Walking away from Christopher earlier was about establishing boundaries, asserting worth, and refusing compromise. Accepting support later was about recognizing the limits of solitary effort and embracing human connection as a tool for endurance. Both choices were acts of strength, but of different kinds. Her independence was hard-won, her wisdom was earned. Together, they created a framework for living fully, an understanding that autonomy and connection are not mutually exclusive, but mutually reinforcing. The lessons extend to every audience member. Maintaining dignity while achieving ambition is critical, but learning when to accept support is equally vital. Gabriella's story illustrates that leadership is not just about individual prowess, but also about discerning when collaboration enhances outcomes. In both professional and personal realms, the ability to balance self-reliance with acceptance of help is an advanced form of strength. Vulnerability is not the opposite of power, it is its complement. Her continued success confirms this. Chun Capital thrives, minority-led startups gain funding, communities benefit from sustainable development. Gabriella remains CEO, building, leading, and innovating without compromise. Christopher stands beside her when circumstances demand it, contributing without diminishing her authority. Together, they exemplify the harmony between independence and interdependence. The scar above her ear is a symbol of the wisdom acquired through trial, a visual reminder that accepting help can preserve, not reduce, strength. Ultimately, Gabriella's story communicates enduring truths. Independence is building your own empire. Wisdom is knowing you do not have to defend it alone. Some lessons can only come through loss, crisis, and the humility of needing someone you once walked away from. Strength has many dimensions, and the courage to choose collaboration, accept support, and embrace vulnerability is as vital as the courage to stand alone. These principles apply in business, in relationships, and in life. If Gabriella's story moved you, show support by hitting that subscribe button. Drop a comment to share where you're watching from. We love connecting with viewers across America and beyond. Tomorrow, we'll bring another story highlighting resilience, choice, and what it truly means to be strong. Your engagement helps us continue sharing lessons that inspire growth, courage, and wisdom. Every story matters, and your support ensures these voices reach those who need them most.